So we've got these tipping points that the IPCC has put forward in its latest report. Now, I briefly mentioned the East Siberian Arctic shelf in a previous video there, which contains a vast amount of methane hydrates in the sediment on the seabed. It's on the shelf seabed. So this is some research that's been done by a Dr. Shakarov. I think it's Natalia Shakarov. She's a colleague of Dr. Peter Wadham's, and she spent a considerable amount of time researching these methane hydrates on the Siberian East Siberian ice shelf. Now, apparently there are other shelves in the Arctic Sea, in the Arctic Ocean, of a similar geological situation with hydrates in the sediments on them. So she's looked at the East Siberian ice shelf for a long time, and I've seen the video that she's taken of these hydrates lifting off, actually melting off out of the sediment and floating up through the water column. Now, methane will dissolve in seawater. That's a well-known property of methane. It will dissolve in water. I think the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline there, where you've got methane bubbling to the surface, I think what that's demonstrating there is that although you've got quite a deep sea in that Baltic Sea there, the concentration of methane enables it to reach the surface without dissolving in the seawater. Things are slightly different in the East Siberian shelf, in that it is a shallow sea. So apparently it takes around about 350 meters of seawater depth to dissolve, for methane to completely dissolve in the seawater as it from the seabed up to the surface. It won't, if the water depth is greater than 350 meters, it won't make it to the surface. It'll completely dissolve in the sea. Therefore, it's not an environmental concern. The East Siberian ice shelf is 50 meters deep to 350 meters deep before it falls off. Obviously, it's a shelf. It'll fall off into the abyssal water, like the plain at the top of the the Arctic Sea there. However, 50 meters deep to 350 meters deep across most of its width and for the length of the ice shelf. This particular scientist, Dr. Shakarov, I'm pretty sure that's her name, she's calculated that there is a minimum of 50 gigatons of methane hydrates, methane gas locked up in these hydrates. Now what that means is, as the Arctic's warming, and we know it is, and nothing is getting done about it, these hydrates do and will lift off this particular ice shelf, potentially many more shelves in the Arctic Sea. Again, multiple gigatons of methane released into the atmosphere, because it's not going to dissolve in the water column. released into the atmosphere in a very, very short period of time, perhaps one summer, so 2 to 3 months, gigatons of methane. Now that is going to have an enormous global impact, without a doubt. And here's what's important about this is, number one, the hydrates are there. We've seen them, we've photographed them, we've studied them. This doctor has samples of these hydrates, and she knows the concentration of them. It's 10 years worth of study gone into this apparently. So they're there. The Arctic is warming, we know that. It's 4 to 6 times faster than the global average is the rate of warmth. And there's nothing that can be done about thawing permafrost at all. The only remedy to stop the permafrost from thawing is to freeze the Arctic. And how do you do that? Just as a question, like as a serious question, how are you going to freeze the Arctic? And how are you going to freeze the Arctic before the permafrost has melted to such an extent that, or thawed to such an extent that there's so much methane in there causing so much warming that no matter how cold you can force it to get, the insulation from the methane negates the efforts that you're making to freeze it. And who's to say that won't happen? Now, my point being that thawing is happening, that methane release is happening, that local global warming is happening, we know it is, and on top of that you've got these methane hydrates that can, within months, put gigatons of methane up into the atmosphere. And how are you going to get that methane out of the atmosphere once it's there? Okay, so no answers. I'm not saying I can't think of any answers. Okay, there may well be answers. If there is answers, how are they going to be implemented? Number one, how are you going to implement the solution? Number two, how are you going to gain the consensus required by the stakeholders in the Arctic to implement the solution in time before you've got these tipping points that are cascading away and destroying life on this planet? Okay, like how you see the issue is we're being told that climate don't worry about climate change. Like there's the right side of the media is saying there isn't really any worry about climate change. It's something, kick it off down the road. Don't bother about it. The left side is saying, oh well, you need to buy an EV. You know, you can't. Like, we've just got to stop using petrol cars, and that's going to solve the climate crisis. We're going to transition to a green economy, right, by 2030, 8 years away. Well, the scientists who are studying Thwaites Glacier, and I've said this in a previous video, they're studying Thwaites Glacier, they've said Thwaites Glacier is going to collapse into the sea in 3 to 5 years. That's their guesstimation. Okay, so you're transitioning to your green economy. You want net zero emissions by 2050, or some people are saying 2030. We've got to have a certain decrease in emissions, and that's going to be affected by people having to buy electric vehicles. There's a whole lot of issues around that. Electric vehicles create a huge amount of environmental degradation from the mining, cobalt and other rare earths and metals that go into building these electric vehicles. And then you've got the issue of the electricity required to charge electric vehicles, which we don't have at the moment, and that's with conventional power generation sources. So there's a number of issues that have got to be overcome so that people can actually use electric vehicles in their daily lives. And essentially by 2030 it's possible you might have a transition away from the combustion engine to the electric car. But there will still be combustion engines. I guarantee here in Thailand there will be the majority of people, and with 70 million population, there will be, I can guarantee it, 90% of the people in Thailand will not own an electric vehicle that they'll use on a daily basis here in Thailand by 2030. Right, but there's plenty of little electric motorbikes here. They're kind of cross between a scooter and a bike, takayan they call them, here in Thailand. They cost 3,500 baht, which is roughly, let me think, $100, $150, something like that, US. It's not a lot. And they basically, like, obviously they're cheaply made. Now I don't even know if they've got a lithium battery or a lead acid battery in them, I'm not sure. The point is, by 2030 I suspect there's going to be these little electric bikes are going to be littering the countryside because they're broken down and it's cheaper just to get a new one than it is to fix the old ones up. So you're going to have a lot of heavy metals in the environment from this disused mode of transport. You know, I can see that. You'd have to be an idiot not to understand that all of this electric vehicle stuff and the wind generators and the solar panels and all of that, you can't recycle any of it. It's all going to break. It's all going to fall apart. Something's going to have to get done about it. And what? What are you going to do? Okay, so you're creating massive problems with the not dealing. Humans are not exactly the most intelligent of species, right? There are some intelligent humans. There've been some astoundingly intelligent humans. Feynman, Einstein, Newton, Archimedes, to go back a fair way. Incredibly intelligent human beings, amazing brains on them. Most humans aren't intelligent. You could describe us as being fiendishly clever, but you know, we've invented the internal combustion engine. Fantastic invention, make no mistake, fantastic. Refined it and refined it and refined it to the nth degree, okay, and look where it's got us. It should have been a stepping stone to another more efficient and cleaner technology back in the 1950s. You know, it wasn't. So that's what human nature is all about. I'm myself included in that. So fiendishly clever but fucking stupid. Here we are, you know, saying we've got to change the environment, get move to electric vehicles. Won't make one iota of difference to the CO2 emissions and the methane emissions around the world. Not one iota. It won't make any difference whatsoever. Okay, or negligible difference, maybe 1 or 2% of the CO2 emissions around the world caused by cars. It's the industrial emissions that are the big ones. It's not fucking people in their cars, and all we're opening ourselves up for is just is environmental degradation from arsehole to breakfast, to use an Aussie term, with broken down electric vehicles and batteries that are no good anymore. You can't charge them forever. They'll eventually, like your mobile phone batteries, they eventually die. You've got to throw them away. What are you going to do with them? Yep, put them in landfill. That's a good idea. So ship them off to Africa. We do that now with everything else. Why not carry on with that? So, and in the meantime, nothing getting done about these tipping points. So it doesn't look good. And the thing is, there's no point in saying, oh look, some magical sky daddy's going to come and make everything better, because that's not going to happen. And we can't take the CO2 out. Taking the CO2 out of the atmosphere, okay, so planting trees is the only way that we know of at the moment that can be scaled up large enough to take enough CO2 out of the atmosphere to affect the emissions that we are putting into the atmosphere. So net zero trees. You'd have to cover every square inch of all of the arable land on the planet to plant enough trees to bring us to net zero. That's the scale we're talking about. So you've got arable land covered in trees. Where are you going to grow your crops to feed the billions of people on the planet? Where's that going to happen? When's that going to happen? Right? So the only real way of removing CO2 in the atmosphere is implausible, because we don't have enough land to plant the trees on. One forest fire through those trees and the carbon's back up in the atmosphere. Okay? So that forest fire due to a lightning strike doesn't even have to have any kind of human intervention there at all. So there is no solution to this mess that we've got ourselves in. Elon Musk, of course, his solution is to fire a few humans off to Mars and let the rest of us fend for ourselves on Earth, basically, which is fair enough. No problem with that. All right, keep going, Elon, and do your damnedest. I hope it works for you. Because I would like to see humans survive. It's just not going to happen on this planet, and that's the sad truth. And scientists aren't. They're holding out hope that something can be done, and yet the politicians have got nothing in place to do anything, and it's too late now, because the tipping points are tipping. They've tipped in some cases in the Arctic. So just what are we going to do? Is the question. What are we as individuals going to do? There's a question for you. Please like and subscribe, and make comments as to what we are going to do about this situation.